Emma Reed had moved into her new apartment in downtown Seattle just 2 months ago. The city was busy, loud, and alive, everything she thought she wanted after leaving her small hometown behind. Her new building was modern, with glass doors and an old elevator that sometimes made strange sounds, but she didn't mind. It felt like the start of something new, a fresh chapter after years of playing it safe. Every morning, she followed the same routine, coffee in hand, coat draped over her arm, an elevator button pressed before anyone else arrived. Most days she'd see the same people rushing out, a mother with her stroller, a student running late, and then him, Daniel Brooks. Her neighbor from 2 floors above. Daniel was hard not to notice. He had that quiet confidence that didn't need words. He always wore a neat suit, carried a black briefcase, and greeted her with a polite nod, never too forward, never too cold. There was something steady about him, something calm that made Emma curious. He seemed like the kind of man who had his life figured out, the kind of man who carried secrets behind a tired smile. Emma never spoke much beyond a quick good morning. She told herself it was better that way, simple, polite, distant. Yet, every time the elevator doors closed behind him, she caught herself thinking about that calm voice and the way his eyes seemed to hold both strength and sadness. That Friday evening started like any other. The city's sky was gray and rain streaked down the tall windows of her building. Emma was heading back from a long meeting, her laptop bag heavy on her shoulder. She was tired, hungry, and ready for silence. As she stepped into the elevator, she sighed, pressing the button for her floor. Just as the doors began to close, a hand slipped through, stopping them. It was Daniel. He smiled briefly, rain glistening on his jacket. "Perfect timing," he said softly. Stepping in beside her, the doors shut, and the elevator began to rise. The sound of rain faded into the hum of machinery. For a few seconds, everything felt normal to neighbors heading home after a long day. Then, without warning, there was a sharp jolt. The floor beneath them trembled. The elevator lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Emma gasped, Kay instinctively gripping the metal railing. What just happened? Daniel pressed a few buttons on the control panel, but nothing responded. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the emergency light that flicked on overhead. "Looks like it's stuck," he said, his tone calm but serious. Emma's pulse raced. She'd never been trapped before. Her mind jumped to the worst possibilities: falling cables, broken floors, running out of air. But Daniel's voice steadied her. "It's okay. These elevators have safety locks. We're fine." He pressed the emergency call button and spoke with the building manager. "Yeah, we're stuck between floors," he explained. "All right, we'll wait." He turned back to Emma. "They said maintenance is on the way. Could take a bit." Emma exhaled slowly. "Great," she muttered, leaning against the wall. "Just what I needed." Daniel gave a small smile. "At least you're not alone." For a moment, they both laughed quietly, breaking the tension. The elevator wasn't large, just enough room for 4 people. But now it felt smaller, warmer. Emma tried to distract herself by checking her phone, but there was no signal. The city outside seemed a world away. Daniel took off his jacket and hung it on one arm. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Yeah," she said, though her heart was still racing. "Just not a fan of small spaces." He nodded knowingly. "Understandable. I think most people feel that way." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It felt different. Emma glanced at him through the dim light. He looked thoughtful, maybe even a little tired. She wondered what kind of day he'd had, who he was when he wasn't dressed for work and carrying that calm around like armor. Trying to ease the mood, said, "So, do you think this happens often?" Daniel chuckled softly. "With this old elevator? Probably once a month. Guess we were the lucky ones today." His humor made her smile, and suddenly, the situation didn't feel so bad. They talked a little about how unreliable the building's power was, about the strange humming sound the elevator sometimes made. Slowly, their conversation drifted to lighter things. Emma told him about her move from Portland, and how she still used GPS to find the nearest grocery store. He listened with interest, nodding occasionally, asking questions that made her feel heard. "And what about you?" she asked. "How long have you been here?" "3 years," he said. "I like this city. Keeps me busy. I work in architecture." Her eyebrows lifted. "That explains the suits." He smiled, leaning back against the wall. "And the dark circles under my eyes." Emma laughed softly. The sound echoed in the small space, and for the first time she realized she wasn't nervous anymore. Maybe it was his calm voice or the way he looked at her not too long. Not too short, but enough to make her feel seen. Time passed slowly, but they didn't notice. Their conversation grew easier, like they'd known each other for years instead of minutes. The flickering light above them cast faint shadows across the walls, turning the moment almost cinematic to strangers suspended in the air, somewhere between floors caught in a strange twist of fate. Then, as another minute passed in silence, Emma admitted softly, "I've seen you before, in the lobby. You always look like you're heading somewhere important." He smiled. "Maybe I was. Just didn't know it was here." For a second, their eyes met. Something shifted. The air felt heavier, the world quieter. Neither of them said anything more. But there was a quiet understanding between them, an invisible thread that hadn't been there before. A sudden noise startled them. The elevator creaked. And the lights flickered again. Emma's heart jumped, but Daniel steadied her. "Hey, it's all right," he said, his voice calm and low. "We'll be out soon." And strangely, she believed him in that small, trapped space, surrounded by silence and dim light. Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, safe scene. An oddly connected dot. The elevator hadn't just stopped between floors. It had stopped time, and though she didn't know it yet, this unplanned stop was the beginning of something she would remember for the rest of her life. The elevator had been still for almost 20 minutes, and the quiet was beginning to feel too heavy. The dim emergency light gave everything a soft orange glow, enough to see Daniel's face clearly. He looked calm, though Emma could tell he was trying to keep things light for her sake. She leaned back against the wall, her fingers nervously tapping the side of her phone, still with no signal. The only sound was the distant hum of the building's power system and the faint rain outside. Daniel tried the emergency button again, but the voice that came through the speaker only confirmed what they already knew. "We're working on it. Might take some time." He thanked them and sat down on the floor, resting his back against the elevator wall. "You might as well sit too," he said with a half smile. "We could be here a while." Emma hesitated but finally joined him, keeping a polite distance. "I guess this is what people mean when they say the city never stops surprising you," she said. Daniel chuckled softly. "Yeah, Seattle loves its surprises, especially on a rainy Friday." For a few moments, they sat in silence again. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet, like the calm after a long storm. Emma glanced at him from the corner of her eye. He seemed deep in thought, staring at the faint reflection of the light on the elevator door. She wondered what kind of man he was when he wasn't putting on the polite neighbor act. "So," she asked, trying to break the silence, "you said you're an architect, right? What kind of projects do you work on?" He looked over at her, his expression softening. "Mostly commercial spaces, offices, stores, that kind of thing. But sometimes I take on smaller projects, homes, renovations. I like the personal ones better. Feels less like business, more like creating something that matters." Emma smiled faintly. "That sounds fulfilling. I write for a living. Mostly freelance stuff, blogs, short pieces, travel articles. It's not glamorous, but I love words. They make sense when life doesn't." Daniel tilted his head, studying her for a moment. "You don't seem like someone who'd write just for a paycheck." She laughed quietly. "I try not to. But bills don't pay themselves." He smiled, and for the first time she saw something lighter in him, a trace of humor hidden beneath his calm exterior. He leaned his head back against the wall, looking at the flickering light above. "Funny, isn't it? We live next door to people and barely know their names until something like this happens." Emma nodded. "I've seen you so many times in the lobby, but I never thought we'd end up trapped together." "Life's got a strange sense of humor," he said. Minutes turned into longer stretches of quiet conversation. They spoke about little things, their favorite cafes, the best pizza place nearby, how unpredictable Seattle weather could be. The sound of their voices filled the small space, making it feel less like a trap and more like a pause from the world outside. At one point, the elevator light dimmed again, and Emma instinctively reached out to steady herself. Daniel noticed and said gently, "It's okay. Just another flicker. These old systems do that." She nodded, feeling slightly embarrassed, but his tone wasn't teasing. It was warm, protective. She took a slow breath, letting her nerves settle. "You're really calm about all this?" she said. He shrugged. "I've been in worse situations. I once got locked in a building overnight during a snowstorm." Her eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Yeah," he said, smiling faintly. "Back when I was still new to my job. I panicked at first, then realized worrying wouldn't open the door. So I made coffee from the office machine and waited it out." Emma laughed softly. "That's actually kind of inspiring." He gave a small nod. "Maybe this is our version of that. Just no coffee this time." There was something about the way he said "our" that made her heart beat faster. She wasn't sure if he noticed, but the way his voice softened when he spoke to her made the confined space feel strangely safe as minutes passed. The mood shifted. The tension faded, replaced by something gentler. Daniel asked her about her writing, and she told him how she once dreamed of publishing her own novel. He listened intently, asking questions like he genuinely cared. It had been a long time since someone had done that, listened without rushing to speak. "You should do it," he said quietly. "Write your book. You've got that look like someone who's got a story she's too afraid to tell." His words hit her unexpectedly. "Maybe someday," she said, "when I'm brave enough." He turned his head toward her. "You already are. You just don't see it yet." The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. She met his gaze, and for a brief second, the air between them felt heavier, charged with something neither of them dared to name. Her heart thudded once, loud in her chest. She looked away quickly, pretending to adjust her bag. But she knew he felt it too, thus shift the connection. Daniel cleared his throat softly. "You know, when I moved here, I thought I'd just keep to myself. Focus on work, avoid people. It seemed easier that way." Emma glanced at him. "And has it worked?" He gave a quiet laugh. "Not really. Turns out avoiding people doesn't make life any simpler." She smiled gently. "Yeah, it just makes it quieter." They fell silent again, not out of awkwardness, but because words weren't enough anymore. The soft hum of the elevator, the faint echo of rain against the building, the dim glow around them, it all created a fragile moment that neither wanted to break. Then, from somewhere above, came a metallic sound, a thud, followed by voices. Emma sat up straight. "Did you hear that?" Daniel looked up. "Yeah, sounds like they're getting close." She should have felt relieved, but a strange part of her didn't want the moment to end. It had been unexpected. This pause in her ordinary life, this quiet connection with someone she barely knew. The voices above grew louder, and a faint vibration ran through the floor. "They're probably restarting the system," Daniel said. "We'll be out soon." Emma nodded but didn't respond. Her mind was somewhere else, on the way he'd looked at her, the calm tone in his voice, the strange safety she felt sitting beside him in the half-dark. Finally, Daniel turned to her and said softly, "When the doors open, let me buy you coffee, just to celebrate surviving this adventure." Emma blinked, surprised by the sudden warmth in her chest. "You're calling this an adventure?" He smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Why not? Every good story starts with something going wrong." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "All right, Mr. Architect, coffee it is." The elevator creaked again, a sign that things were about to move. Emma took one last glance at him, realizing how strange it was that a random breakdown could make her feel more connected to someone than months of casual greetings ever had. In that stillness before the motion, returned. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Maybe fate wasn't always loud or dramatic sometimes. It whispered in the dark inside an old elevator on a rainy night, reminding to strangers that timing doesn't always have to make sense. And just as she thought it, the elevator hummed softly again, ready to move, but Emma knew that when those doors opened, life outside wouldn't feel quite the same anymore. The elevator hadn't moved for almost an hour now, but neither Emma nor Daniel seemed to notice the time anymore. The air had grown warm and still, carrying the faint hum of the emergency light that glowed above them. Their voices had softened, no longer strangers filling the silence, but two people speaking honestly for the first time in a long while. The fear that had once hung in the air was gone. What replaced it was something gentler, quiet understanding. Daniel leaned against the wall, sleeves rolled up, his jacket folded neatly beside him. He looked relaxed, almost peaceful, though his eyes carried a quiet exhaustion that made Emma wonder how much he kept buried behind that calm face. "Crazy night, huh?" he said, half laughing. "Yeah," Emma replied. "It's strange how fast everything can change. One second I'm thinking about dinner, and the next, I'm sitting here talking to my neighbor like we've known each other for years." He smiled softly. Maybe it just takes being stuck between floors to make people honest. She thought about that for a moment. He was right. There was something about being trapped together that stripped away the usual small talk. They didn't have anywhere to go or anyone to impress. It was just them, two tired hearts in the dark, learning to listen again. Daniel glanced at her. "You mentioned earlier that you moved here for a fresh start. Did something happen?" Emma hesitated, her eyes lowering for a moment. "I guess I just needed a change. I was engaged once. We were together for years, and I thought it was forever. But things fell apart quietly. No fights, no big betrayal. Just distance. One day I woke up and realized we'd both stopped trying. So I left. New city, new apartment, new everything." He listened carefully, not interrupting. There was something comforting about the way he stayed silent, as if her words mattered. When she finished, she gave a small shrug. "And now here I am stuck in an elevator, oversharing with my neighbor." Daniel smiled gently. "I don't think it's oversharing. Maybe it's what you needed." Emma met his eyes. "What about you? You mentioned you've been here 3 years. That sounds like someone who's either very happy or hiding from something." He gave a low chuckle. "Maybe both." Then his tone softened. "I was married for 8 years. We were good together once, but life got busy and we drifted apart. No big argument, no blame. Just silence. When it ended, I thought I'd be fine. But silence has a way of getting too loud after a while." Emma looked at him quietly, realizing how much they had in common. Different lives, same kind of loneliness. The elevator light flickered again, dimming for a few seconds before glowing steady once more. The soft shadows made everything feel more intimate, like the world outside didn't exist. "I guess both of us were running from something," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, maybe we were meant to run into each other instead." She smiled faintly. "You always this philosophical when you're trapped in elevators." "Only when I meet someone worth talking to," he said simply. The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, pretending to check the panel again. Her heart was beating faster now, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that felt like awakening after a long sleep. Daniel noticed, but didn't press. He sat quietly, giving her space. Then, after a moment, he said softly, "You know, I've seen you before too. In the mornings. You always look like you're in a hurry, but still trying to keep everything together." Emma laughed lightly. "That obvious." "Not in a bad way," he said, "just like someone who has a lot on her mind but keeps smiling anyway." His honesty surprised her. "You really notice things, don't you?" "I try to," he said. "When you spend years working with structures and designs, you start paying attention to the details people overlook." Their eyes met again. This time, neither of them looked away. There was no rush, no need to speak. Just that quiet pull between two people who didn't expect to find connection in a broken elevator. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of everything they weren't saying, everything they both felt but couldn't explain. The hum of the light, the faint echo of the rain outside. The warmth of their voices, it all mixed together into something strangely beautiful. Then Daniel spoke again, softly. "Can I tell you something honest?" Emma nodded. "I used to think you were out of my league," he said with a small laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "You always looked so confident, so put together. I figured someone like you wouldn't even notice someone like me." She blinked in surprise. "You thought that?" "Because I thought you were the one out of reach. Always so calm, always looking like you knew exactly where you were going." He shook his head, smiling. "Guess we were both wrong." For a few seconds, neither spoke. The world seemed to narrow down to the small space between them. Emma could feel her heartbeat, the soft tension in the air, the quiet warmth that was growing stronger with every glance. Before either could say anything more, the elevator jolted suddenly. The lights flickered and the floor vibrated beneath them. Emma gasped and instinctively grabbed Daniel's arm. He steadied her instantly, his hand gently wrapping around hers. "It's all right," he said, his voice calm and low. "They're probably trying to reset the system." She didn't let go right away. The touch was simple, steady, reassuring, but it said more than words ever could. For a moment, the whole world outside the elevator didn't matter. There was just the warmth of his hand, the sound of his breath, the realization that something inside her had shifted. The lights blinked again and then steadied. The elevator was still for now, but something between them had changed permanently. Emma slowly released his arm, embarrassed but smiling slightly. "Sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he said quietly. "You had every reason to hold on." She looked at him, and there it was, again, that softness, that quiet honesty that made her want to trust him. The kind of connection that didn't need grand gestures or perfect words, just a shared silence that felt right. For the first time in a long while, Emma didn't feel alone. She didn't feel lost or small. She felt seen. They stayed like that for a while, sitting close, talking in hushed tones as the elevator groaned quietly around them. Every minute that passed brought them closer, not through stories or laughter, but through the comfort of understanding eventually. The faint sound of machinery echoed from above, signaling that help was near. But neither of them rushed to stand up. They knew that once those doors opened, the magic of this quiet, unplanned pause would fade. Still, when Daniel finally looked at her, there was no sadness in his eyes, just certainty. "Whatever happens when this thing moves again," he said softly, "I'm glad it stopped tonight." Emma smiled. "Me too." And as the elevator hummed to life, rising toward the light above, they both knew something simple and true. Sometimes fate doesn't knock it, traps you between floors just long enough for two hearts to finally find each other. The elevator shook once more, then gave a long groan before humming back to life. The dim light brightened. The floor vibrated gently beneath their feet, and Emma and Daniel both looked up in surprise. After what felt like hours, they were finally moving again. The silence between them was no longer awkward or fearful. It was charged with quiet emotion, the kind that settles in after something meaningful has been shared. Emma straightened her hair and brushed off her jacket, her heart still racing from the jolt. Daniel stood beside her, calm but visibly thoughtful. Neither spoke as the elevator crept upward, the faint hum of the motor breaking the stillness. Then, with a soft ding, the doors slid open. Warm light from the lobby poured in. The sound of faint traffic and rain replaced the still air they'd been breathing for so long. A maintenance worker stood waiting, holding a flashlight and looking slightly embarrassed. "Sorry about that, folks," he said with an apologetic smile. "Old building. Power issue. You two okay?" Daniel nodded. "We're fine. Just glad to be out." Emma stepped out, taking a deep breath of cool air. It felt strange to stand in an open space again, as if the world had moved on while they were frozen in time. She glanced back at the elevator, the narrow metal box that had stayed, somehow changed everything. As they walked toward the reception desk to sign out of the incident log, Daniel glanced at her. "You sure you're okay?" She smiled softly. "Yeah, more than okay." He studied her for a moment, then returned her smile. "Good. You handled that better than most people would." Emma laughed lightly. "If you'd seen me in the first 10 minutes, you wouldn't say that." "I did," he said gently, "and you still did fine." They both fell silent as the maintenance worker called after them. "Thanks for your patience. Elevators should be working by tomorrow." They nodded politely, then stepped out into the crisp night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and shining under the glow of the streetlights. The air smelled of wet pavement and city lights, a familiar but comforting scent. They stood side by side under the canopy outside the building entrance, watching cars pass. For a while, neither moved. It felt like they were caught between two worlds, the quiet intimacy of the elevator and the ordinary rhythm of city life waiting to resume. Finally, Daniel turned toward her. "You need a ride? I parked just across the street." Emma shook her head. "No, I'll walk. My favorite diner's a few blocks away. They're open late." He hesitated, then smiled slightly. "How about I join you? You mentioned earlier you owe yourself a dinner after that long day." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me out, Mr. Architect?" He laughed softly. "I think the elevator already did that for me." Her laugh echoed lightly in the quiet street. "Then I guess it would be rude to say no." They walked side by side through the damp streets. The city felt softer at night, streetlights glowing like quiet stars, shop windows reflecting golden light onto the puddles. Their steps fell in rhythm, the sound blending with the distant hum of cars. Neither rushed to speak, content to simply walk and breathe. When they reached the diner, Emma pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming gently. The warm air inside smelled of coffee and pie. They found a corner booth by the window, and as they sat down, Emma finally looked at him fully. "It's strange," she said quietly. "We've lived near each other for months, and yet tonight feels like the first time we've really met." Daniel nodded. "Maybe we were waiting for the right moment. Sometimes life chooses it for us." She smiled. "You really do sound like an architect. Everything designed for a reason." He grinned. Maybe I just stopped believing in coincidences." They ordered coffee and something simple, grilled sandwiches neither of them were really hungry for. The conversation flowed easily. They talked about work, favorite movies, dreams they once had and still wanted to chase. There was laughter, soft pauses, and that growing sense that this was not a random night tit was the beginning of something at one point. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You know, I don't usually talk about my personal life, but with you, it felt easy, like the words were already waiting." Emma met his eyes, her voice soft. "I've felt the same. It's been a while since I actually listened to someone and felt listened to." The simplicity of her words hit deeper than she intended. Daniel didn't look away. "Then maybe we shouldn't let this just fade when the sun comes up." Her lips curved into a slow smile. "Are you saying we should keep talking after tonight?" "Exactly that," he said, eyes steady on hers. For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. The diner's neon light reflected off the window, framing their faces like a quiet photograph to people who'd stumbled into each other by accident. Now, sitting across a small table, realizing that some moments weren't accidents at all, they stayed there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. The clock ticked quietly above them, unnoticed. When the waitress came by to refill their cups, she smiled knowingly. "You two make a nice pair," she said with a wink. Emma blushed. Daniel just smiled. "Guess we do," he said softly, once the waitress walked away. When they finally stepped out of the diner, the air was cool again, carrying the faint scent of rain. They stood on the sidewalk, the city quieter now, the reflections shining faintly in the puddles at their feet. "So," Emma said, "coffee next time we get trapped somewhere." Daniel laughed quietly. "How about before that? I'd rather not wait for another elevator breakdown." She laughed, shaking her head. Fair enough. He hesitated, then reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face. For what it's worth, he said softly, I'm glad it happened. Not the getting stuck part, but everything after. Her heart warmed at his tone. Me too. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The world around them felt still again, like that moment in the elevator quiet. It's uncertain, full of promise. Then Daniel spoke again, almost in a whisper. So, tomorrow, 8. Emma smiled, her eyes meeting his. Tomorrow. And maybe I'll let you pick the place this time. Deal, he said. He walked her to her building entrance, and for a brief moment, they stood facing each other in the glow of the streetlight. No grand gestures. No promises, just a shared understanding that something real had begun. As Emma stepped inside and turned to look back, Daniel was still there, hands in his pockets, smiling softly before walking away. She closed the door, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Later that night, lying in bed, she thought about how strange life could be, how a broken elevator and a few quiet hours could change everything she thought she knew about timing and connection. She smiled to herself, whispering into the dark, maybe some stops are meant to happen. And somewhere across the city, Daniel looked out his window, the same quiet smile on his face, thinking about her. The night had started with two strangers trapped between floors, but it ended with two hearts finally finding the courage to move forward.